On this episode of the Home Studio Hangout podcast, we have pop mix engineer Brent Hendrich. We talked to Brent about the early days of home studio production.
It was early, but it was there, and it's just gotten better and better, obviously, over the years.
How he made the transition from fully producing projects to only mixing.
I decided I want to just do what I enjoy the most and what I'm best at.
And I asked Brent this question. What are some things that you see that maybe some producers could do better and make your life easier?
Ooh, I like that question.
Welcome back to the Home Studio Hangout podcast. I'm your host, Drew, not joined by my co-host, Josh, today, but I am joined by Nashville pop mixer, Brent Hendrich. Dude, I'm so glad that you are here joining us on the podcast today to have a little conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's kind of go through, for the people that don't know who you are, what you're doing out in Nashville. Why don't you give them kind of a rundown of who you are and what you do?
Sure. I've been in Nashville a long time. This is, I guess, going to be my 24th year. I moved here when I was 18 years old. I grew up in East Tennessee. And, I guess at around 16, I knew I wanted to make records for the rest of my life. So it was something that kind of came to me early on, and I'm really thankful for that. And so there was a few options, going to school at like Belmont or MTSU. That was like the university path, or SAE had just opened up a school here as well. And after talking with some mentors and other people, they were like, the university doesn't really matter. You don't have to do that. So I went with the path and the technical path and went with SAE. And I was there for 9 months, and that's kind of how long that program was. And then got out of there and started doing internships. I'm giving you the very fast version here so we can get into the good stuff. Because I've talked about this a bunch in other podcasts. So after I got out of SAE, I was 19. I did 2 different internships. One was probably for like a year or so doing music for daytime television for CBS. It was with the principal composer of the show The Guiding Light. So it was a lot of like setting up for sessions, recording strings, recording piano, vocals, tuning things, editing things, all of that. And then after that, I started working with one of my kind of favorite producers from when I was in high school, which was a really cool thing for me. A guy named Pete Stewart. He was producing all of the like Christian rock records at the time.
Very cool.
So I worked with him kind of as his engineer. He was using a recording system called, oh gosh, I can't even remember what it's called. It's been so long. But it was like one of those, Paris, I think is what it was called. Paris. This would have been this would have been like back in 2000, I don't know, 1, 2, or 3, somewhere in the early 2000s. And it came with like its own computer, and it had its own like controller and everything. And the converter sounded really good. So I helped him track in that and learned that a little bit. And then did a lot of like session setup, got guitar tones, learned kind of how to mic drums the right way over time and edit drums beat by beat and all of that kind of stuff. So he ended up moving to California to play in a band. And that was, I guess, when I was around 23. And that's when I decided, it's time to go freelance. Wanted to always be kind of my own boss and kind of make the final decisions on the records that I was involved with. And so I guess I've been, a freelance, full-time producer, engineer, and mixer for 20 years. And it's just been the past 2 or 3 years that I've kind of shifted into just mixing full time. So that's kind of how we get to today.
Yeah. I would love to hear a touch base on, because I hear so many people coming out of the Belmont scene and maybe even the MTSU scene, but I don't hear enough people talk about like the SAE program and like what did for you. Because I feel like that should be more of a viable. I mean, I know people do it. It's a big program, but I don't hear it talked about as much in like the regard that a lot of those other things get talked about. I would love to hear your experience with that.
I think a technical school like SAE is the second best option. And at the university, I think is the third best option. I think the best option is no school at all. That's what I preach now. SAE is good because you learn the things that are maybe a little harder to learn on your own, especially signal flow, how to get around a console or a tape machine, some of those type of things. But and then the university is just you're spending a ton of money and you're learning a bunch of things that you don't need to know in an industry that doesn't care about that at all.
And most of the times they're 15 years behind
Yeah,
their
exactly.
educational stuff. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I tell most people, if you're disciplined enough and want it bad enough, then, do all the online stuff, the YouTube, the mix with the
Mhm.
masters, all the forums,
Yeah.
record whoever you can for whatever they can pay, get your experience. It doesn't cost a lot to get the tools that you need to do this now. It was a lot different in the early 2000s. It was kind of
Yeah, for
as we were
sure.
still transitioning into the whole DAW thing. But yeah, there's just so many great resources. You probably want to move to a town that has a scene to have enough
Mhm.
people to work with and get having a mentor, still doing like some type of internship, I think is a great thing. I learned way more on those two internship and assisting jobs than I ever did at SAE. And on those jobs, I didn't pay to do those. And with one, I got a little bit of money for doing it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think that's a better way to go for people who are
No,
just
I
getting started.
100% agree. Yeah, and I think we had this conversation somewhat recently with somebody, and he came from another country to America, and he was saying like the number one thing he wanted was to be in a studio.
Hmm.
Didn't care about school, because I mean, also coming from another country, that's not really like a thing. He came from Mexico City, so it's like not really a thing that you think about. He's
Yeah.
trying to come to make records. He's trying to come to do the thing, and he said he was now, as he's more of like normal mixing, mastering, freelance, doing it for like lots of big records, you see some of the people that could have made it that sometimes had their growth stunted by some of the either the financial burden
Hmm.
or by just like being taught things that were out of date or not having enough
Yeah.
hands-on, which I like you said, like finding some sort of internship, some sort of place where you can go and like physically put your hands on things and learn from somebody who's doing it professionally
Yeah.
already in the current industry
Right.
is going to always be a better option.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you're learning those modern production techniques and things from someone who's actually doing it. Whereas school, it's like you said, it's outdated. And so, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. And not having that burden, I think, also is a good thing. If you're living in a city like Nashville, it's already expensive enough just to live
Mhm.
here and to be working and to have a bunch of student debt and all that. That just like you said makes creates even more of a strain, I think. And so I think more of an ideal situation might be working part-time somewhere, as you first get started. And then those like the other half of the week, you're doing those internships or assisting someone as well as kind of getting your hands dirty and doing some stuff on your own. And
100%.
hopefully, yeah, hopefully all that kind of will come together and help, pay the bills. So that's what I
Yeah.
would
So
recommend.
so bringing it up to now, so you started in more of like an assistant engineer kind of role is kind of what it seemed like.
Yeah,
You know,
not in a commercial studio, but yeah,
but,
in,
but
early home
yeah.
studios. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in an early home studio. So you kind of been in the home studio from the earliest point of what a home studio would have been, it seems like, which
Yeah.
is really cool to
Yeah.
see that progress. I'm sure like you watching that progress over time, up until now has probably been
Mhm.
pretty crazy with the advancements in technology and all that kind of stuff. What do you find that there are some consistent things like in a home, like working in a home studio, since you've kind of been there from the beginning, there are some consistent
Yeah,
things that
for
you
sure. I just shared actually a picture last week on my Instagram of me in my first home studio, which was when I was in high school. It would have been like 98 or something. That's when this
yeah.
photo was from. It was a scanned actual physical photo. It's that old.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of similarities to my current studio now. I mean, there's a computer, it's just slower. There's an interface, it's just the conversion's not as good. There was a DAW, and there was Waves native power pack, which was some of the plugins that I
Yeah.
still use today. And, preamps. It was a cheap Mackie board, but yeah, all that stuff was there. It was early, but it was there, and it's just gotten better and better, obviously, over the years. But of course, my monitoring and the acoustics of my room, those are probably like
Mhm.
where things have kind of uh, grown the most in my world. But
For
yeah, I mean,
sure.
it's most of my career has been. I mean, I've done a lot of work in commercial studios as well, but that was more of when I was producing and more for like full band tracking, or I need
Yeah.
to get like a record worth of drums done. So let's book this room for 2 days and cut drums.
Yeah.
So those kinds of scenarios. I never never mixed, on an actual large console. I never have any desire to do that. I've always been mixing ever since day one in the box, and I've always been a huge fan of mixing in the box. And I
I've
think
done it
it's,
one time,
yeah.
and recall is a nightmare.
Oh yeah, that's one of the
That's
many
the main
reasons.
thing. I
Yeah.
never want to have to do recall like that again.
Yeah, recall, the cost of the room, working in an environment that you don't know as well as your own room. I think that's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah,
So
because most of
yeah.
the time you don't just sit and listen to music in that room. So
Oh,
you're
right.
having to
No.
like
Yeah.
you're just having to like completely change your ears to a different environment, and that's yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so you said you did some production. So that was
Mhm.
that, when you start, was that kind of early in your I'm going to start doing my own thing kind of part of your career?
Yeah, so I guess in '03 or somewhere around there when I went freelance, I wanted to produce and engineer and mix everything. At the time, my role models were the John Shanks and the Dr. Lukes and the Max Martins and all those people like producing pop records. I was into Katy
Yeah.
Perry and Kelly Clarkson and whatever, Avril Lavigne and all that like
Yeah.
pop and pop rock stuff. And so, yeah, I wanted to make those kinds of records. I always, tried to be like the LA guy in Nashville, even early on.
Yeah.
And
Very
so
ahead of your time in that.
yeah, I guess so. Yeah. And so I loved production just as much as mixing and engineering, all of those things. I kind of wanted to be a bit of a jack of all trades. There would be times where I'd just mix a record or just come in and do like the band tracking or the drum tracking. And that was all that I did. I enjoyed all of those different, you know, uh, parts of the process. They were all fun and challenging in different ways for me. And that's, like I said, something that went on for at least 15 years. And I just got to a point, maybe with age or something, where I decided I
Yeah.
want to just do what I enjoy the most and what I'm best at, and was mixing. I always was in a mixing headspace, even during production. I think it got in my way a little bit. And I
Hmm.
started to realize that there were a lot of other people that were better producers than me. And my production work just took too long. So it just didn't make sense financially at times when it's like you're spending 4 months on something and,
Yeah.
making $3 an hour, and that just doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Budget's not there for that anymore. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So in my room here at my place is just more of a mixed room. I don't have any ISO booth or anything like that. So just there's a lot of reasons, but mainly because I got to a place where I just wanted to niche down and do exactly what I want to be doing and just get like really, really, really good at one thing and not have any other distractions to take away from that.
100%. I know. I think I try to tell people that are like younger that are coming up, to take that route, not only like to be in the studio and like get hands-on training with somebody who's doing it, but when they do decide to like get their hands into everything,
Hmm.
because it's impossible, like in your situation, it's impossible for you to know I only like mixing if you decide I only like mixing from the jump. You don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
So like learn to do production, learn to songwrite, get in songwriting rooms if you can't have the availability
Hmm.
to like, mix your own projects, try your hand at mastering, master your own projects, and like be a part of the industry in every facet, because you might learn that you like you're more of an A&R, and so
Hmm.
you want to be an A&R, so that completely changes the trajectory of what you decide that you want to do. You might
Yeah.
decide I don't like mixing records, I like handing off the stuff and having somebody else polish it off. So
Hmm.
you just want to be a songwriter and maybe a producer in that role,
Yep.
but without trying all of that stuff and having your hand in everything, yeah, you would not have the opportunity to know.
Yep. I think part of the reason too was because I was just looking for income in audio anywhere. And
Yeah.
if that meant, you want me to just
100%.
come and engineer or something, that's fine.
Yep.
I'll do that. I got to pay the bills this month. And so
Yeah.
I think that's another reason why maybe it started that way. Hey, will you master my record? Yeah, sure. I don't know how to
Yep.
master that well, but I'll figure it out,
Yep.
because I need to. And so that was part of it. And I think another good thing about doing a little bit of everything early on is now it allows me to like speak the same language with producers or
Mhm.
mastering engineers. I can know what a mastering engineer is going to want from me, or if something doesn't feel right in the arrangement, like I can have that conversation with the producer and seem intelligent.
Yeah.
So I think that's they're kind of all intertwined in a way. And I also think that like having a production background maybe allows me to be a bit more of a creative mixer, or just think about things like the arrangement, like a producer
Mhm.
would. Whereas if you're just technically minded, maybe that could get in the way at times. So just some
No,
thoughts.
yeah, that makes it also allows you to empathize with like the process of like you said, the process of each space, right? So
Hmm.
you have expectations going into mastering, so you know what that mastering engineer is most likely going to want. Or in communication, like you said, you know how to speak their language, you know how to make sure that when you send something out to them, it is correct from the jump, rather than having to get an email back and then you be busy and then it take a day or so and it be
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, sorry, I can't get to that until the next day, and so now the project's delayed or
Hmm.
whatever.
Yep.
And on the opposite end, like you said, working previous in production, it's, hey, there's like this weird thing in like this area, and it
Hmm.
sounds kind of like it's, you know, whatever, it's the frequency on a vocal, or like it's this take is weird, and like, or the double is strange, or
Hmm.
whatever it
Yeah.
might be. Like, see
Yep.
if we have their options, and if they don't, then whatever. But having that communication with the producers also, what the expectation is and what they should be able to provide as well, which I think
Yep.
is super helpful from a mixing engineer standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree.
um so you transition from kind of doing everything
Hmm.
into the mix only world.
Hmm.
Uh and you also kind of transitioned was that genre wise also a transition for you, or was pop the goal from the beginning?
Well, yeah, like I said, I mean, I've always kind of been pop's always been my thing. I mean, I mentioned the Kelly Clarksons and
Yeah.
the Avril Lavignes and the Michelle Branches, like especially like a lot of the
Yeah.
female early like pop rock kind of stuff. I loved a
Hmm.
lot of that. So I've always done more pop than anything else. I've never done really anything in the world of like R&B and hip hop or country. So it's always been either pop, or I did a lot of rock in those early days too, when rock was, I think, a little bit more of a thing,
Yeah, mid
before
2000s it
2010.
was
Yeah.
more on the charts. Yeah.
Yeah, so I did a lot of rock stuff, a little bit of heavy stuff, and quite a bit of singer-songwriter stuff as well. I
Okay.
enjoyed doing like organic things and things with live drums,
Hmm.
acoustic instruments and stuff. But yeah, so it was kind of like a jack of all trades and working in quite a few different genres. And it's just every year it's been like getting just a bit more focused. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now, is doing what I love the most, which is mixing into the genre that I love the most and I have the most experience with, which is pop. And I just think that my aesthetic as a mixer works the best in the pop space. My attention to
That makes sense.
detail, like my
Mhm.
precise kind of way of working, I just think that just works really well in the pop space, and
No,
works well for me. So
that makes a lot of sense. And
yeah,
yeah, you tend to lean towards your proclivities to your genre, so yeah, does make a lot of sense. Like,
yeah,
you wouldn't make a very clean, heavy record. Like, just wouldn't really work that
yeah.
well.
Yeah, like my current mix bus wouldn't sound good on probably like a folk record or something like that, with
Exactly,
all the
exactly. Way too
processing, all that
crushed.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I like to process things. I like to be a bit heavy-handed and make some bold moves, and sometimes
Yeah.
with certain records, certain genres that would be frowned upon, I think. So
Yeah. Well, I would love to hear, like, so what would you say is like a bold move that you tend to see yourself making that a lot of other people don't, just on a more
oh,
technical
like
sense?
just on a random line in verse 2, like distort the vocal, or really like do like some crazy big delay throw on something, or saturate the entire mix, or
Mhm.
like just whatever 40 dB of compression on a vocal, or I don't just
Yeah.
anything like that, whereas I think certain genres, they want you to maybe play it safe and not have things that they would call distracting, and
Sure.
pop it's more of a feature, I guess. So I
Yeah.
don't know, there's a few examples, I guess, that come to mind.
So that's funny that you say that, because we were talking about like how the difference was between, like, especially in compression, you see this a lot. Like in hip hop, you don't touch you don't have a whole lot of heavy compression, at least from my experience. You don't
Mhm.
hit it. You're not slamming it. It's going to be what it's going to be. over
Yeah.
the the music bed. But like I come from originally from heavy music, and like in heavy music you're doing like 20 dB of compression like 4 times,
Yeah.
and you're sending it through like a distressor, and you're sending it through like maybe you're limiting it or doing some sort of clipping on the vocal or
Hmm.
something, and like your master bus is pinned, and like that's normal. And
Yeah.
like people see that and they're like, yo, I would never do that.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say from a mixing standpoint, let's maybe get some information from you on what are some things that you see that maybe some producers
Hmm.
could do better and make your life easier, from a mix standpoint. Like, what are some things that you see that either are good things that you see a lot or negative things that you see a lot? Kind of a, what are some
Yeah.
things that producers can learn from a mix only engineer?
Ooh, I like that question. It's a hard one though. Things that producers can do to make my life easier. Well, I will say I'm fairly blessed most of the time. Like this stuff that I get are from producers who could also mix it if they wanted, and they kind of
Sure.
know roughly what I need, and so they're usually pretty good about getting things right before I even get to it. Just there's simple things like fixing edits, where so I don't have to do it and it slows me down.
Hmm.
Probably just thinking like maybe a bit more about the arrangement, not overproducing. When things get too cluttered, there's a lot of frequency masking and things that you have to deal with. So just, I think a producer just knowing, um, you know, to how to arrange the track in a way to where it's then going to actually make for a really great mix. I think that's kind of an art form in and of itself. And I know that the producers that I work with that like are really good producers, a lot of them are minimalist. It's not always 120 tracks. Sometimes it's just like 50 some tracks, but it's
Yeah.
because they've gotten the very best five things working together in that course, and that's all it needs to sound really great. I think lots of times amateur producers will send over just way too much content, and then
Mhm.
it kind of puts me in a bind, and I have to figure out how to make all this work. And so maybe that's something that comes to mind, is just knowing what you should and shouldn't send to me. um Gosh, I'm trying to think of other things.
Well, that makes a lot of sense actually, because I've been in a place and like I've been working with some other like mixes that I get or
Hmm.
stuff that I send out. I've noticed that people tend to be I tend to do better mixes when they are more focused. Like
Yeah.
you said, you're more intentional about we want the right guitar tone. We just don't want a guitar tone, and we don't want stacks of guitars, or we don't want stacks of synths. We want to
Hmm.
make sure, or if we do have stacks of synths, they are working together in such a way that it builds like a final idea
Yeah.
rather than, so like you said, being more intentional with
Yes.
the specific things that you put in, making sure I would actually say that biggest the biggest issue that I've seen it in is it can be drums a lot of the times where like snares, you got like four stacks of, sometimes people will stack snares and like it's just not right, or
Hmm.
like a kick is just like it's not the right sound for what they're trying to achieve. And
Yep.
so then you have to go in and you're having to do these weird EQ moves and this weird compression that could have just been simply fixed by sometimes retuning the kick or using a different sample,
Hmm.
or play like if they played it in by hand, maybe it would have felt dynamically more correct,
Yep.
or knowing when to make those kinds of decisions. I think from a production standpoint, yeah, it can be a massive thing for a mix engineer. Makes our lives a lot easier.
Yeah. And I mean, I tell all producers, like, don't be afraid to commit. I love when producers commit. If you
Mhm.
have some crazy effects on a vocal, please like print that before you send it to me, because it'll take me forever to try and recreate it and it still won't be as
Recreate it,
cool.
yeah.
So yeah, so if you love something, commit to it. I'm not afraid of that. We can always try and go backwards if we need to, but it makes my life a lot easier, and it allows you to get what you've kind of envisioned from the get-go. So I don't know if that kind of ties into what we're talking about, but I do
No, yeah, it
really
does
highly
definitely.
recommend like printing things.
I think from a on that note, like printing is, I think, one, it's just easier on your computer. So from a technical standpoint, it is just kind of better to do that sometimes. But
Mhm.
also, I don't know, sometimes whenever I do a crazy move and I print it into audio, it feels more final, and I feel more like if I'm printing it into audio as a producer, like I feel very like was my choice. This was an
Yep.
intentional choice. I am doing it. And on top of that, especially when you're doing more MIDI stuff, like choosing sounds and printing them,
Mhm.
or like guitar tones, if you're using, we'll say if if you're printing like a amp sim or something, um, it just reacts to plugins differently.
Hmm.
Like when it's printed audio, like it just
Yeah.
does, like it that is just factual that it just does.
Yeah.
So so whenever you're hearing things differently and you're checking stuff and you're printing throws and all that kind of stuff, it's going to feel closer to what that producer might want it to be before it even hits you. So then they're even more confident when they send it to you,
Yeah.
and then maybe they can even parse through some of the like, oh, we definitely don't need this track. Oh, we definitely don't need this track. And try, I think I tell producers when I get stuff, it's try muting some stuff.
Mhm.
Like, don't be afraid to like go through your tracks and try muting some things and make sure that it is what you need it to be
Yeah.
before it gets sent out.
Yeah, for sure. And check your files in a new project before sending them to
Yeah.
me to make sure it's all there and it sounds, like the rough does, because that's the worst, is having to you pull it all in and then realize it's not all
Yeah.
there, or it's not
Yeah.
right or something. So
Or something like got nudged, or
hmm
something got printed half a bar off or
exactly.
something
Yeah,
like
you're not
that. It's the
exporting
worst.
from a beat or a bar. That's the worst. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I hate it so much. Because then you're like, I can't tell if this is supposed to be that way, or if like, are you making an artistic choice here, or is this
yeah.
just wrong?
Yeah.
So you mentioned rough mixes. I've been kind of getting into this more, this idea of producers being good enough to mix a really good rough mix
hmm
and get an idea across to a mix engineer like yourself. How important do you think that is for like somebody? How important is that for you? Like receiving a really good idea of a rough mix?
Yeah, the rough mix is way more important to me than ever before, because I think producers are becoming better mixers, and they're also, they, especially in the pop space, they get pretty attached to like this vision that they have and kind of where they want it to go. And so my goal early on is to, listen to that rough and just take some notes and try to figure out what it is that they, I think that they really are attached to, that they really like, and then what are some things that I can do to make it better. And so I'll just kind of figure that out really early on, and that kind of gives me somewhere to go. I also try to do phone calls and emails, and I have
Mhm.
like an intake form with tons of questions. I talk about this a
Sure.
lot, which just it's all about getting in their heads as best as I possibly can, asking as many questions, and trying to just get a read on how much flexibility do I have, or how much do I need to chase this rough. And if I do need to chase the rough, then yeah, I'm doing those things where I'm really paying attention to how they have things panned and placement and effects and all of that, to where I can get that going, but then try to then give it whatever that extra 20, 30, 40, 50%, better than where it's at now. So yeah, it's a very important thing for me. I used to not listen to the rough as much or pay as close of attention
Mhm.
to it, but I found that some people, like, demoitis is a thing, and
Yeah, for
the
real.
rough mix demoitis can pop into the mixing side of things too. So yeah, I think it's important for sure.
No, I think I think as music gets more, let's say, weird and like eccentric,
Mhm.
especially in the pop space, right? 'Cause with like the move towards like hyper pop as a genre. I don't know how much of that you've like mixed before, or
None,
that
yeah.
you're like aware, but are,
Yeah, yeah.
more of like what you're aware of. But that sound and some of those choices are starting to seep into more mainstream pop music. Your
Mhm.
more distorted 808s, or your more distorted kicks, and like that also kind of comes from hip hop, and like, so some of those weirder choices you aren't going to innately do. And so having a really good, clear, rough mix from a producer
Mhm.
standpoint is going to just help you, give you a clearer direction on getting to that final product together. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like more
Yep.
hand holding rather than
Yeah.
like, hand off.
Yep. No, and when you're holding hands with them, they feel more involved in the mixing process as well, I think, and there's some ownership there. And I think that that's a really good thing too. I talk about that a lot as well. I think it's important for them to feel involved and let them know that you're doing what they want, not what you want. So yeah, I preach that all the time too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so let's get into some stuff that you've kind of learned more recently.
Hmm.
I like to call it, like your some things that have like unlocked your brain or kind of broke you over a ceiling,
Hmm.
either helped you break through a ceiling or, yeah, helped you progress in some way in the past couple years. Like, what are some of those things that have, from a technical standpoint, that have really
From a
like
technical,
elevated
okay.
you?
Yeah, I think just as being a mixer, just upping my monitoring is the first place to start. That was an investment that I
Okay.
made a couple of years ago, and
What monitors are
um,
you on?
I'm on the Neumann KH310, so it's a three-way uh, closed cabinet. So it's like a 8-inch woofer, and then it's got the mid-range driver. It's kind of like the
Mhm.
what is it, the SCM 20s or 25s or whatever those ATCs are that
Yeah.
everyone likes.
Yeah.
Only
The
these
ATC
are not
25.
ported; these are
Yeah.
closed, so it's a little bit different feel. But
Gotcha.
it's like that, and then two Neumann subs as well. And Neumann has their monitor alignment software, which it's kind of like Sonar Works that's saved into the subs that spits basically
Okay.
everything to the main. So so yeah, I've been working in this room for 16 years now, and so I know the room super well. Most of the treatment is the same that it's always been. There's a few
Mhm.
kind of upgrades over the years. And then I've just been on these monitors for I guess a couple of years. With the second sub was kind of an addition just a year or two ago, and that helped out the low end. So between the great monitors in a room that I know well and the tuning that's happening behind the scenes, it gives me a really flat frequency response. And I think that's the best place to start as a mixer, is just
Mhm.
knowing that because every decision you make is based on what you're hearing. So
Yeah.
I just want that flat response, and I feel like it really helps with translation on the thousands of devices that people listen on. So that was kind of a place that I really wanted to start investing in first, and just make sure that what I'm hearing is just the best it can possibly be. So the detail is just great here. It makes me
Yeah.
work quicker. It means less revision. So it just makes the whole process a lot more enjoyable. I feel like I'm more inclined to listen at lower levels because the monitoring sounds good, which is also
Mhm.
important for making it through
Yeah.
the entire day.
Longevity. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like sometimes when you've got shitty monitoring, you just like crank it to compensate for
Yeah.
shitty monitoring
Yeah.
or something like that. So,
And then
uh,
and then it starts distorting in the upper mids, and then that makes your mix changes different, and then yeah, and then your transients disappear or something like that, or get weird. So
yeah, so that's one thing that I think has made a big difference with my work. Another is probably I talk a lot about my soft tube console one, which is a big part of my workflow. Big fan of
interesting.
that. Yeah, I have it. I pair it with the 4,000 and the 9,000 channel strips, and the thing I like about it is not even as much the plugins, but just the way that it forces me to work more of a
Gotcha.
tactile, like using my ears and not my eyes as much.
So
So
I've only ever seen that. I've never
mm,
used one myself. I'd love like kind of a general explanation of what it is, and maybe for those that don't kind of understand
yeah,
what we're talking about.
it's just like a single channel strip basically. It's like this big, and I don't know if you're listening, I guess you don't know what that size is, but
Yeah,
it's like
it's like the size of a keyboard, like a MIDI controller or
yeah,
something like
like a
that from what
40
I remember,
some
yeah.
key keyboard. Exactly. There we go.
Yeah.
And it has your input gain, and then it has your high cut, low cut filters, and then a gate, an equalizer, a compressor, saturation. You can, at least in Cubase, I can tap into sends 1 through 3 there as the output volume. So you can do so much, whatever channel is selected. If you have the console one plugin on that channel, then you can just with your hand start turning knobs just like you're on a real console without even seeing any plugin interface, which is great because I feel like lots of times if you're using like a Pro Q3 or something, maybe you're
Mhm.
a bit timid at times because 9 dB of a whatever like just doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
It looks too crazy. But on the console one, I'm just turning stuff until it sounds really cool. And I
Yeah.
think that's a great thing, because then you're not using your eyes. So I like the console one because I use my eyes less and my ears more, I guess is the short answer. But it also, I can put that console one plugin on basically every channel of my mix, and it's like working on a SSL 9000. I mean, the emulation is so spot on. And
Mhm.
back to the recall thing being a pain in the ass, working on a big console, recall is great
Yeah.
because it's all in the DAW. And yeah, so as long as I'm, whatever I'm selected, whatever track I'm selected on, I can, do pretty much anything with dynamics and EQ and filters and saturation and all that. And so it's nice. I'm also like a big fan. I've gotten more of like into this, less plugins, but like the ones that I really like and know really well. And so
Yeah.
knowing that like I can throw that on anything and get most of what I need. I mean, I'm also pulling in other plugins for additional saturation or
Sure.
weird things like, the unique things like Soothe or
Mhm.
stuff like that. But as far as like a great EQ, great compressor and great filters and all that, it's all right there, in that one plugin. So
100%.
uh, yeah.
Yeah, I've found you were talking about like the using your eyes, not your ears kind of thing.
Hmm.
So I when I produce, I have a studio in town that I generally work out of,
Hmm.
and they for their drum sound got like a bunch of those Newton channel strips. You know what I'm talking about? The Neve Newton channel
Hmm.
strips. They're
Oh,
pretty
okay.
sick.
Yeah, yeah. That's like one rack space kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, those
Okay.
single rack, they got like
Yeah.
they got basically 16 channels of that. Um,
Wow.
yeah, but what I've noticed, because it's like in front of me whenever
Hmm.
I'm working on drum, because it's like obviously it's just on the way in stuff. It's very for like gentle EQ, gentle compression, but like sometimes on a vocal, I'll sit there and I'll just go until it sounds right, and I'll find
Hmm.
myself just cranking the top end on something, and I'm like, I would have
Yeah.
never done that
Hmm.
if it was a visual, like you said, like a Fab Filter, EQ3 thing decision.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I 100% have firsthand experience with literally that exact thing. Same for kick
Yeah.
drums too. On the low end, sometimes, like, it hits because it's boosted like crazy, and it just needs that extra bounce.
Yeah, I think, and if you got like a bus compressor or something, just putting tape over the gain reduction meter, so where you're not even because you might just be like, oh,
Yeah,
it's getting up to 5 dB, that's too much. Well, that's infecting like the decisions that you're making there, and I think it's just best. I think it'd be great if a lot of plugins like you could hide spectrum analyzers easily. I think lots of
mhm.
times we let the spectrum analyzers kind of make decisions for us. Same with like I said, gain reduction meters. I tried to get people on board with finding a way to at least hide the solo button in Cubase. I thought that would be a great feature as well.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of people just like, I guess, to have that stuff to fall back on. But I don't know. I think there's
Yeah,
a lot of things that we can remove from, our workspace that actually could maybe be beneficial at times. You can always turn that stuff
100%.
back on again, but I think some of those things we get in trouble with some of those things.
100%. And it makes us make weird decisions sometimes, I think, as mixed engineers, right? And
Yeah.
as producers, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, who cares how it looks? It's just because it looks pretty doesn't mean that it's going to sound great. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to, we're in such a visual world now with all the plugins and being in a
Yeah.
box and all that. That's why I like the console one, is it kind of it kind of removes some of that new school way
And
of
console
working.
one is
So,
something that's been really interesting to me, because it's something that, yeah, I feel like, one, I don't think not enough people are talking about it,
mhm.
because like I think it's an innovation, for like a mix side of things. Like, it's an innovation for literally what we're talking about, getting it more tactile, getting your eyes off of the screen,
Mhm.
and doing more innate movements rather than, based off feeling. But
Yep.
then also, like what you're talking about, like, gives you the feel. Their emulation is crazy. You're talking about
Mhm.
an SSL 9000. So I when I was coming up, I worked on an SSL 9000J,
Yeah.
and like I've heard a lot of Soft Tube's emulation of their SSL stuff, and I have a very hard time telling any kind of a difference
Yeah.
based off of that. So,
Yeah.
like, just from my experience on their stuff, it's crazy how good their emulation is.
Mhm.
So, from a recall perspective, it's insane. less plugins in general
Mm-hmm.
used, from a minimalism perspective. You know that you're going to have these specific things going in, that you're going to be able to get, obviously not 100% across the board for every single track, but
Sure.
in pop music, especially with pop producers, you're probably getting a lot of stuff baked pretty well. So
Yeah.
there's not going to
Yeah.
be you're not going to be super heavy handed with a lot of stuff. I mean, it's obviously sometimes you can be, and that can be an
Sure.
artistic choice, but I
Mm-hmm.
think in general, it's probably not going to be. I mean, do you find that that's pretty much the case with you?
Yeah, I think on most tracks, 4 or less plugins on a vocals where you're going to see the most, inserts. So that could easily be five,
Sure.
6, 7 inserts
Yeah.
there. Same with my mix bus. It's got quite a few things as well. But yeah, if it's some whatever clap sample, throwing a
Yeah.
console one there just for like a little bit of analog color and to be able to maybe bump some low mids and a little drive on the saturation
Toss a
knob
little
there, it's like
saturation
done.
on it. Yeah.
It sounds like a record, so yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's great. Like I said, the all in, it's kind of it's a Swiss Army knife, really, is what it is.
100%.
Yeah.
So on that note, are you fully in the box, or do you have any outboard as far as like physical hardware?
Yeah, I've never had any actual physical hardware. I've always been in the box. Recall for me is
Yep.
everything. I want to pull something up 5 years from now and it sound exactly the same way as it
Hmm.
does today. And just knowing
That
that to have to keep a piece of gear around forever, or
Yeah.
it changes, the sound changes over time, or getting it to recall exactly the right way. It's like, why? There's so many, there's a plug-in for everything, that's out
Yeah.
there. So, it just,
Do you find that so this is something that I feel like I don't know how what your view on this is, but I'll tell you kind of my view on this is this is the kind of I feel the same way about recall with hardware as I feel about plugin subscriptions,
mm,
which is like
you're stuck.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
I want to buy my plugins one time,
Yep.
please. I don't want. What if I decide that I don't need these plugins anymore because I have other things that, and then I go to recall a session, and then half the session is screwed up because of I happen to be at that point using a like no shade to the Slate people, but that's why I don't use Slate
Yeah.
personally.
Same.
I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
people love it and people swear by it and people make great records on it, but I can't get over that monthly subscription kind of potential of disaster
Yeah.
years down the road with a mix recall.
Yeah.
What
Totally
are your
agree.
thoughts?
I'm in the same boat for sure. Like, the only Slate stuff I have is perpetual license stuff that I
Mhm.
got a long time ago. Slate hasn't been getting any of my money the past few years because of
Yeah,
that whole subscription. It's anything that, you can get in the, whatever it is, the virtual channel strip or whatever. I can get that
yeah,
1,000 other places too. There's
yeah.
way more plugins out there than we need at the moment.
Especially if
So
you're using the soft tube stuff, there's a lot of crossover. And uh me and Josh did a co-host did we did a plugin tier list where we were just like what do we feel like, and this was like as a whole, like what do we feel like have like some of the best plugin. So
mhm,
we doc like for obvious reasons we had to dox like Wave and Slate for bloat
mhm,
because they have so many plugins that you're just like half like I'm a mix engineer, so I don't need any of these mic things, you know what I
yeah,
mean? Or like from Waves, they have
s-
just they're just
synthesizers and yeah,
yeah, it's crazy. But then you get into like I feel like Universal Audio and Soft Tube and like Oak Sound, I would say is, some of the like everything you get is usable, everything you get is really good, everything is going to be like top of the line. Now I've heard people talk about SSL's plugins in the same kind of way.
mhm.
I have not personally used them. I don't know if you have messed around with
I've
their
got a
stuff at
couple of
all.
them, and I think they sound great. I've got their saturator. It's like something like X saturator. I picked it
Mhm.
up one day for $17, and it sounds really, really nice. It's subtle, but it sounds great on vocals and bass, and a
Yeah.
few things I've used it on. I've been really happy. And then I bought, I think it was like a vocal channel or vocal strip thing where it's kind of got compression and de-essing and deplosive and like a
Interesting.
2-band EQ or something. It's very, I went for so long like not using it and being mad that I purchased it. I mean, it was probably only $20. I usually buy stuff when it's like some crazy cheap special, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that sounds kind of fun. I'll buy that and see what
Sure. Yeah.
happens. $20, that's not too bad.
Yeah.
And now I've actually find that I use that plugin a lot on BGVs, where it's like, I don't want a ton of plugins on this. I just want to
Mhm.
like carve a few things, compress it a little bit, and this and that, and do it all in one plugin. And it's been
Yeah.
actually really great for that. I like it a lot.
It was crazy to me that UA gave away their 2A the
Oh
other
yeah,
like
I grabbed that. Yeah, yeah,
it's such a good 2A.
yeah,
Like I love that. That's been
yeah.
like my base 2A recently. I love it so much.
I hate that it forced me to install like the other,
Their
the
freaking
UA.
plugin thing?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like the native side of things, whatever I forget,
Yeah.
Spark, I think, so it's like
Yeah.
I have to run Spark to use that one plugin, but whatever. I mean,
Is whatever. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Are you interface wise, are you a UA guy or are you Antelope or
Yeah, no, I've had this Apollo, like the 8 in, 8 out Apollo for
Mhm.
a bazillion years, one of the silver ones. It's like
Yeah, the 8
the
8P?
Octo. Yeah, I forget even what it's called, but
Yeah.
it's the 8 in, 8 out. It doesn't have the pre's or anything, and it was back before it even had Thunderbolt, and you had to add, the Thunderbolt card to it.
Yeah. Okay,
And
yeah, I know what you're talking
so,
about. That was their
yeah, I've been
one of
on
their
that.
first 8 in channels, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I bought it used like forever ago for probably like $1,200 or something, and
Sure.
it works. I go digital out of it into my monitor controller, and then that's actually where I do the D to A there, and it
Ah.
sounds really good. I have an
What
Audient
monitor
Neuro.
controller is that?
It's called a Neuro by Audient. They're out of the UK. I
Okay.
think they make like consoles and stuff.
I love
It's an
audience stuff, dude.
Dude, the monitor controller is so good, and they're like $500, and they're like built like a tank, and the conversion sounds really, really good to me. And I have,
Looking
all
it up
three
right
sets of
now.
my monitors on there, and it's got the dim and the cut and the 4 headphones and the talk back, and it's got all that. And so yeah, I highly, highly recommend that for just like I mean, you can spend more, I guess, and get like a Grace or something, but I just don't know if I would really, if it would do much more for me. So
I was gonna say, I feel like there's a price disparity
yeah.
around like with monitor controllers. Honestly, around this price point, which was like $500 or $600,
Hmm.
like at a point, does it really get better, or
Yeah.
does it get $1,000 better?
Right.
Really?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
I
Could
think
you
it's
hear?
crazy that you can go optical into it. That's
Hmm.
really cool because
Yep.
you just bypass all of the D to A from from your interface, basically.
Yeah, I guess it just keeps me in digital until the very, very end, which in my head makes sense. There's something too
Mhm.
in the Neuro, the controller, that some proprietary thing that they do that keeps the left and right channels like perfectly in sync somehow. I don't know if that's to where there's never
Oh.
like a few tenths of an offset to one side or the other as the knob is coming
Yeah,
up or
prevents
what,
like
but
cone filtering or phase issues from the left and the right just being ever so slightly off time internally.
yes, something. It sounds really good. I mean, before that, I had like one of the, what's the personas that everyone has, like
Yeah, the monitor, the one
control
monitor
one,
thing.
yeah, something like that. And this was just the build quality. I mean, it feels like you're on a console, the buttons and everything. It's more of an industrial feel. So I highly recommend using it as a monitor controller.
I always tell, especially like mixers that are people that are like, well, I want to mix. The audience stuff is like, even on their lower end, the 2 channel like basic stuff,
Hmm.
the conversion is just so good for the
Yeah.
price. It's
Yep.
crazy how good it is for, I think like $120. You can get like the
Oh wow.
single channel one,
Yeah. Over a
and
Focusrite or something, I'm sure it's way
yeah,
better, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like your conversion's going to be better, dude. I had an entire argument with somebody about how um they I was like I can hear the bad conversion in the Focusrite like stuff. I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
it's very obvious. Like I don't
Hmm.
understand how you don't hear it.
Hmm.
Especially people that are like, more that have been doing it a little bit longer. Like
Yeah.
obviously to newer people, do what you got to do, get what you got to get. I totally understand. But for people that have been doing it for a while that just like refuse to upgrade, it's because it's good enough. It's like it really isn't though. Like for the same cost, you could sell that off to somebody that's just getting
Mm-hmm.
started, and for the cost of selling that, get something. I would say like the UAD, like the Solo. I
So
think they used to be called
yeah.
the Arrow.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's like $400. That's incredible. But even the lower tier stuff, the Volt
Yeah, I have one of those.
interfaces,
It's great. Yeah.
yeah, they sound great. The conversion on
Yeah.
those is really good. Obviously, it's
Yeah.
not going to be the same, but it's
Yeah.
still fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And then yeah, you get into like the audience stuff and the baby face, like I forget what the brand is,
Oh, is
but
that
yeah.
RME maybe or?
Yeah, RME.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those their stuff's crazy too for the
Yeah.
price.
Yep.
Um yeah, so there's, you know, harkening back to like earlier in the conversation where we were saying like the growth of the home studio over time. It's like it's crazy that I would say in talking about this as well, it's crazy that for $500 you can get like something that clean.
Mm-hmm.
And it's even crazier that as the price point goes down, the disparity doesn't get too much worse.
Mm. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. I always like finding that sweet spot of where it's like not spending a ton of money, but you're getting a really great product. And I
Oh,
do think that
100%.
the Nero is definitely a sweet spot for sure.
Yeah, no, that's
Mm.
really cool. So kind of landing the plane here, last 10 minutes or so on here. I'd love
Yeah.
to kind of get some, as music people, we fell in love with music, and sometimes whenever we start working in music, we kind of stop listening to music quite
Oh
as much
yeah.
or finding new things or,
Mm-hmm.
getting into things. So I'd love to hear from you something musically, this two-parter, something that you have been really stoked on lately. Could be something old, new, doesn't really matter. Just something that you've been really stoked on. And then something that you find underrated. Somebody that you think deserves more love, or a record that you think deserves more to be in the limelight more than it is.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned, I think the longer I do this, the less it feels like I just listen to music to listen to music because
Mhm.
that's kind of what it's it's just part of the job.
Yeah,
I guess you're listening to music all day, and so the last thing you want to do at dinner is listen to some more music. So I
yeah,
do find
exactly.
myself doing a lot of podcasts and
Mhm.
YouTube and audiobooks and all of those kinds of things just to kind of break it up a little bit and give my ears a
100%.
break. But uh it's funny. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and she's like really into pop stuff right now. So she and we kind of like to jam out to the same stuff in the car. So what we're
Nice.
really digging right now is probably the new Tate McRae record. That song "Greedy," the single "Greedy." I
Yeah.
love that, and my daughter loves that, and that like is the definition of the kind of pop stuff that I enjoy working on and want to be
Yeah.
working on all the time. And anything that like Serban or Manny or Spike or those guys are doing, that
Mhm.
top 40 female pop, like that's what I love the most. And so that's probably like the first thing that comes to mind as far as like what I'm digging right now.
Yeah.
And I do listen to a lot of the Spotify Pop Rising playlist and Fresh Finds Pop. That's usually where
That's
I
more
find
for
myself.
research, probably.
A lot, yeah, because I do a ton of outreach and build new
Yeah.
relationships with producers making records that I really enjoy. And so it is a
Yeah.
lot of like listening to things that I like, seeing who worked on them, and reaching out and meeting
And
up and
also
stuff.
like
So
staying on top of current sound trends and things like that
yeah,
as
exactly.
well.
Keeping that's the thing. You got to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening, especially in pop. It's constantly
Mhm.
evolving. And so, yeah, that's another just great benefit I think of listening to those playlists. But and then someone that I think is underrated. There's an artist that I've mixed a few things for here recently. Her name's Callie, and it's spelled like Kaylee is the way it looks, but she goes by Callie. Maybe that's how it's pronounced. I don't know. But I
Mhm.
really have been digging this. I just finished this week second song that I've done for her, and I really feel like she's got the complete package. She's 21. She's got an amazing voice. She's got the looks. Like her
Yeah.
brother is a great collaborator, a great writer. She's been working with my friend Austin Bianca, who's a great producer here in Nashville, and like she's someone that I could see being like the next Tate McRae or the next Billie
Yeah.
Eilish or someone like that. Like I just think that for her just getting going and only having I think 3 singles or 4 singles out now, that she's she
And
could
how do you
really.
spell it? Just so I can make sure that people.
It's like well, it's spelled like Caleigh, like Kaylee, but I think it's pronounced Cali, like Cali. So she's on
And it's
Instagram.
just that name.
Yeah, I think
Nice.
so. And I can send it to you if you have like show notes or something of where other people can
Yeah,
look it up. But
I'm pulling it up right now. Black Sheep, lowercase x,
yeah,
Mean
yeah. I
Girls.
mixed lowercase x. Black Sheep was like a couple years ago. That kind of came out
Gotcha.
before I got in with the team. But and then Mean Girls just came out, and it's doing really well. I think it's already got over 100 and some thousand streams
That's
already
awesome.
in a couple weeks. But I didn't unfortunately mix that one. But
But
then
it's great
yeah,
to see. It's great to see the artist like expanding. You know,
yeah.
you
Oh,
love to
yeah.
see it.
Yeah. Her, listener numbers or whatever are going up really fast. So, that's the
That's
kind of
awesome.
stuff that I was expecting. And so, yeah, hopefully this fourth single will do really well as well. And,
That's
I
killer.
can kind of keep working with the team because I love just, it's right up my alley. I feel like I do my best work when it's, the kind of music that I love listening to, and,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's probably like the first thing that comes to mind is just like someone who I think is really great, but also I can kind of plug something in a way too
Yeah,
that I'm
for
working on.
sure.
So yeah, hopefully those answer your questions.
I'm trying to like, obviously we have a bunch of episodes. So, and I asked that question to like everybody that's on the podcast, and I'm
Hmm.
trying to put together like a big database playlist on Spotify and Apple Music so that whenever, especially like I said, and like you said, when you work in the music industry after a while, like you kind of stop getting a big influx of new stuff and
Hmm.
like new sources, and you tend to just like default on things that you've listened to before, or like in your case, like you're looking at things but more from like a research analytical point of view and less to just like enjoy.
Right. Yeah.
I'm really trying to build this like cool playlist for people like us that if you're like, I just want something out of left field and I don't know what I'm going to pick, you can just go down the playlist and pick something random. And it's something that, somebody that's on the podcast has kind of recommended uh, from like that kind of perspective. And that way you don't
Yeah.
lose touch in different genres, or you might hear something that you're like, oh, that's really sick. Never would have thought to try that thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. For
So,
sure.
well, Brent, if people want to find you, people want to
Hmm.
reach out, people want to hit you up, whether it's socials or website or all of the above, where can they find you?
Yeah, I've got a website, brenthendrich.com. That's been around for a long time. I try to keep that up to date. You can, there's, a bio and several different playlists. You can hear my work. There's all my whole Instagram feed comes in there. All the podcast and interviews and articles and things I've done over the years are there. So it's a good place to kind of learn more about me. And then if you kind of want to keep up with me and learn a few things along the way, Instagram is the place to go. And that's just at Brent Hendrich. And I post, do 3 posts at least a week there and some reels. And yeah, try to share just things that I've learned along the way and promote some of the stuff that I work on occasionally too. And yeah, and
Heck
then
yeah.
I always like to also mention for several years now, I've been hosting a meetup here in Nashville called Summing Mixer. And we meet the last Tuesday of every single month at a place called Humphrey Street. And that's from like 9 to 11 a.m. And I provide the coffee, and it's just a bunch of producers, engineers, and writers and session musicians and all that. And so I always want to make sure that anyone who's especially like new to town has a place
Yeah.
to come and get connected, because that's really important to me
That's
right now.
super
So.
cool, man. Honestly, I wish we could have talked about that a little more too, because so my co-host Josh is actually he's in Atlanta right now. He's been doing a lot of hip hop. He's moving into the rock pop world, so he's about to move to Nashville. So I'll have to definitely connect him
Yeah,
in
please do.
that space whenever he gets moved up that way.
Yeah, it's so exciting to see like people that are new to town, like being able to come in and meet like, someone who's been in town for 15 years, like working on records, and be able to, ask questions and how do I get in here or do this, or how could I meet this person? Or so it's a very helpful community. And it's also just really cool to see people start working together, whereas a
Yeah.
producer will meet a mastering engineer and now like that's who masters all their records. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
so
really
sick, man.
important to me right now. So yeah, that's something that I like to mention as well. Can't think of much
Being
else
the
to promote.
connector always feels really cool, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah. I actually read part of a book on that recently. Maybe it's called like Super Connector or something like that. But
Okay.
yeah, so I'm trying to do more of that kind of thing. Like just, I think maybe it's just because I've been in town for so long. I feel like I should be
Mhm.
doing that, and that's like kind of my
Yeah.
job now that I know so many different kind of people on all sides of the glass. So
Yeah. Well, Brent, thanks so much for coming on the podcast with us today and
yeah.
chatting and hanging out a little bit, talking shop and whatnot. Yeah, it's great to meet you. Great to, learn more about you.
Yeah, man, it's been great. Next time you're in Nashville, or if you're ever in Nashville, let me know, and we'll hang out
Yeah.
and grab a cup of coffee or something.
Yeah, would love to. Listeners, thanks so much for listening, watching on YouTube. Subscribe if you can. All the links for Brent will be in the description below, and we will see you guys in the next one.